Welcome to LifeProof Relationships, a podcast brought to you by us, JourneyOn Coaching. I'm Kylie.
And I'm Christy, and we are a mother-daughter power team. We're both certified life coaches. We've made coaching not just our careers, but our way of life. We have hundreds of clients, over more than 2,000 sessions of direct coaching experiences. And we've got a lot to share with you. Our clients come to us with all sorts of challenges and desires for change, but without fail, we ultimately arrive at the core of everything, cultivating relationships.
Yeah, so if you're interested in exploring ways to transform your relationships, to be more loving, nourishing, and dynamic, please join us. Whether we're talking about partners, family, friends, or coworkers, we'll always ground back into the foundation of them all, which is your relationship with yourself. So, let's introduce the topic of today's session, and that is the third pillar of a life-proof relationship, which is expand your awareness. This is one of 5 episodes in our Life-Proof Pillar series where we present the framework that we're developing to collaboratively cultivate deeply connected relationships, especially your relationship with yourself. So each episode in this series is a standalone episode. You can listen to them on their own, but to really get a picture of a big picture of what we're doing and what we're sharing here, we encourage you to listen to each one. So in order, the LifeProof pillars are 1, choose love, 2, connect to the vision, 3, expand your awareness, 4, nourish, and 5, opt in. So let's dive into number 3. Alrighty, so expanding your awareness. This really has 2 parts to it. 1 is seeking to understand, and 2 is studying yourself and each other. So let's start with the first part. Seeking to understand. Seeking to understand is an active process. It takes effort, it takes intention, and it takes looking. So let me give you an example. If you are looking for something in your room, what do? You look for it. Like, you go to places in your room and you look in your closet, and you look in pockets of your last worn jacket, you look underneath the bed maybe. You have to search. You don't just walk into the room and wait for the keys to fly out of the wall and hit you upside the head and ooh, I found them. So to really find something, you have to look for it. And so I use that example when we're relating with other people, because if we really want to look for the parts of them that really matter, if we want to find them, their heart, their soul, if we want to understand where they're coming from, who they are, we have to look for it. And so that's when I really like to articulate this as it's a 2-way street. Being understood is a 2-way street. How well you are able to search for in others what's most important, and how well you're able to articulate that when you find it. And it's also up to them too to really assist you in that process and let you know what it is they want you to see. So go ahead, Chrissy. I can tell you want to say something.
So to me, a 2-way street also implies that both of you really want to understand one another, So it's not just you noticing in your partner what they want you to notice about themselves. It's also them noticing what you want them to notice about you.
Mm-hmm.
And then communicate.
There's a real element to curiosity here.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get to know you. I want to understand what's under the surface for you. We might have a conversation or a discussion about like one of us who didn't clean the kitchen one night, and kind of getting underneath the surface of the like what's happening here and now kind of thing to realize, okay, having a clean space for you allows you to feel peace, which is something you really, really care about. So
Yeah,
it's
that's
not
true.
it's not just about the dishes. It's like the way my space is really important to me. And that's an example of going down beneath the surface. And usually when we go deeper is where we find a lot of our compassion. So it's a really good exercise. So I want to bring up two things in the realm of seeking to understand this first part of expanding your awareness. The first one is to have a conversation together about what it is you want to be seen from the other. So I'll give an example. For me personally, I wrestled with being on time my whole life. I've certainly gotten much, 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 much better than younger Kylie. But it's been a journey for me that's taken effort and dedication and lots of reflection. And so when my partner would get frustrated with me when I was late, I asked her, I said, okay, hey, I like respect your frustration right now, but would you please be willing to notice the times that I was on time, the times that I did, set up my day in a way that was organized so that I could make my commitments on time. Could you recognize that I'm trying? Could you recognize that I've made progress? I may not be perfect yet, but I've made progress. And so when she does that, it really softens me. It's like, okay, yes, I've made progress and I still need to make more progress. And it really it like keeps me out of the defensiveness, without feeling accused of, not being perfect yet. And it lets us have that kind of real talk conversation where she really is genuinely frustrated, where in a way that I'm really receptive and open to the discussion.
Yeah, this makes me think of steel manning. Why don't you tell our audience what steel manning is?
Uh-huh. Yeah. So steel manning is the second kind of resource here that I'd like to present within this first part of seeking to understand. And that is, steel manning comes from the debate world, where you may have heard of the term straw man, to straw man somebody, where you kind of pick apart their argument and find the weak links and then break apart those and think that you've destroyed the argument and that you've won. A really, like, an exaggerated example would be you read an email from somebody and they misspelled something. So then you respond back with, I can't believe anything you say. Like, you misspelled this word. So, like, everything else you said was a moot point.
Yeah, which has absolutely nothing to do with the content of the email. So they
Yeah.
just strawmanned out. Uh,
Yeah. The word straw man comes from, like, you create a straw man version of what they're saying, and then you like attack the straw man. And once you defeat the straw man, you're like, mwahaha, I won the argument. But really, you just defeated like a joke version of the argument and didn't actually interact with the real argument. And so the conceptual opposite of that is steel manning. And that is to create a steel man version of the argument. And then once you have that, then you go to bats with the steel man version, where, winning the battle with a steel man is like has more glory, essentially, because you really actually defeated the beast. So that's why that's its roots. And so there's a 3-step process to steel manning that I've found to be really helpful. First, you have to recognize that you're having a misunderstanding. You have to recognize that you're like kind of getting distracted by surface level stuff, by like you're kind of almost falling into the trap of straw manning each other, you know?
Well, and you're certainly not choosing the love.
Yeah.
Our first pillar, right?
Our first pillar, right? And so that's number one. You have to recognize the moment when you need to do this. Number two is you pick one of you. You say, okay, we're going to steel man you first. And you enter this kind of state of the conversation where you're like, okay, I think you're saying this. And you check for clarity. Like, are you saying XYZ? Or are you saying XYZ? And they're like, okay, I think I'm saying X, and I'd like to add this extra detail. And you kind of, you start to like team up and collaboratively come to the strongest version, like the fully fleshed out actual opinion and perspective that someone is having. Because honestly, most of the time when we're having conversations, especially ones of consequence, we're not really interacting with people's fully baked thoughts on a topic. Like we're like processing in real time, and we may not have come to clarity yet on what we really think, but we're kind of like, processing in real time. So you go ahead.
So what's coming up for me is you mentioned early on in this podcast about curiosity and having curiosity. So how do you shift gears, focus on the other person, and really get curious about, 360 degrees of what they're trying to say and articulate and express?
How do you get curious?
Yeah. How do you do it?
Yeah, great question. Especially when you're really frustrated and triggered, how do you step into that grounded state where you're not so reactive? Yeah, good one. My first answer is to pause and like take a time out. Take a moment to separate, get some actual physical space, maybe go drink some water, go for a short walk, eat some food. Doing all of those things is stimulating like your rest and digest nervous system. And you can kind of get out of that fight or flight mode. The stress response, which is usually what we're in when we're in arguments. So the first thing is, if you're in that triggered state, I mean, and this takes practice, and nobody's a straight A student at this, trust me, but taking some space and coming back to the conversation when you're feeling more settled.
Yeah. So I think another point to name to our listeners is noticing and being aware of yourself in that moment is just absolutely critical. So first, there's probably a biological reaction that you're having to what your partner is saying. And that could be something like your legs start shaking if you're sitting down, or your heart rate starts to increase, or your throat chakra gets a little congested, or you have some kind of biological reaction. And then there's a feeling that comes up. And it could be that feeling of, not this, like resentment. It could be a feeling of overwhelm. So there's some kind of feeling that happens. And that's that magic moment where you're feeling the tug of the pull of the conversation that could just launch you into an old behavior pattern that you have the opportunity to respond differently. So just as Kylie said, if you can pause, take a breath, actually physically remove yourself from the scene. Even if you're on Zoom, both of you take a physical break and come back. A little more nourished, a little having had the breath, so that you've down-regulated your nervous system. So then you have a really good opportunity to participate in this steel manning exercise. So
yeah,
go
exactly.
ahead, Kylie.
There's a quote from Viktor Frankl. He was a Jewish psychologist during the Holocaust, and he was imprisoned in Auschwitz, and he wrote a book after he survived called A Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, He says, the space between stimulus and response is where we find our freedom.
Yeah, I love that.
And so that's
that.
what you're really pointing out, is that sacred pause.
Yeah. Is the moment of the most freedom that we ever have is to respond in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's so cool.
The difference between a reaction versus a response is one that has intention. Hey there. I wanted to take a minute to tell you how you can get LifeProof coaching from us. It's super simple. Just go to our website, journeyOn-coaching.com, and sign up for a free introductory session with either Christy or myself, Kylie. This is our passion and it's our way of life. So if you're feeling called to reach out, don't hesitate. We look forward to speaking with you and getting to know you.
All right. So both of you are all set up now. You've come back, and now you have one of you that you're spotlighting to really support and nurture and bring out everything that they want to say about what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
spotlight is a great word. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, put the spotlight on one person. All right, we're going to focus on you right now. What are you really trying to say? What's the steel man version of your perspective? And then once we have that and mutually agreed, okay, is this what you're saying? Yes, that's what I'm saying. Then you switch the spotlight to the other person and you do the same thing.
And it's okay if you use the term steel womaning. It doesn't have to be steel manning.
True.
or just steel personing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So once you have the steel man version of each person's perspective, then you go forward. Then you go forward into, okay, given the circumstances and the context that we're in, perhaps we should go with one person's perspective or the other. Maybe we could, compromise here.
Well, actually, it's what can we agree to?
Yeah.
And what can we commit to? What both of those, because they're different.
Yeah. You go from two individual perspectives and you go towards creating a shared perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
So that's the 3 stages of steel manning. 1, recognize that you're having a misunderstanding. 2, put the spotlight on each one of you until you have the steel man version of what each of you is saying. And then 3, move towards a shared understanding of what's going on. That's when you make the decision.
Okay. So that's just great about seeking to understand as being part of expanding your awareness for one another. So what's the second part, Kylie, for expanding your awareness?
Yeah. Okay. So the second part of this pillar is studying yourself and each other. This is where you hit the books, essentially, learning about attachment styles, diving into family history. What patterns exist for you in relationships? How do you commonly relate to other people, both when you're grounded and settled and also when you're under duress? Like, what are your triggers? What are your fears? This is really, really, really powerful to do in relationship with another person.
Yeah, and I imagine this is kind of an onion approach. Like when you're first in relationship with somebody, you're not going to bear everything.
Right.
You're going to just give some of the topical things. Well, Uncle Fred's kind of just maybe a bit of a jerk, and so we just all avoid Uncle Fred, So, but as the relationship matures and continues to go forward, then get more serious, and the opportunity to really explore what those attachment styles are, the family history patterns, present themselves. But you also have to be intentional about it. So
yeah.
Say more.
Yeah. So a good analogy here is if you're aware of your patterns, it's really helpful in allowing you to access that sacred pause that we just mentioned. because you can see what the stimulus is, what your common reaction is, and you have an opportunity to make a different choice. And an analogy is, think about being in the break zone of the waves, like at the beach, and you just keep getting pummeled in the face by wave after wave after wave. That's kind of like what it's like when you're just in the depths of your patterns, just being triggered and reacting.
And if you're more of an inland person, then it's like getting into a river that has a significant current, and you're in your raft, let's say, or your kayak, and all of a sudden the current just takes off and you're off for the ride, man. You're just, whatever the class, rapids are, you try to read the river, but you're going until there's, more still waters. You're in basically the neural pathway of the behavior pattern.
Yeah. I actually think you're articulating something that's slightly different, but related. What I'm trying to say is that, like, when the difference between just being caught up in your patterns and not being aware that you're in the patterns is like you're being hit in the face by the waves and you can barely catch a breath. But if you're aware of your patterns and you can, like, oh, okay, I'm reacting this way because I have a anxious attachment style, and so I'm reaching and grasping right now. If you can say so, if you understand that about yourself, it's like giving yourself a boat. It's like giving yourself a surfboard. Like, okay, the waves are still there, but now you're on top of them, and you can choose your direction. You can choose whether or not to ride them. You can choose to skip that wave. You can choose to duck for frickin' cover. But noticing your patterns and understanding, like, your family history, your triggers, your attachment styles, that's it's like giving yourself a board, a surfboard. What you were saying is the feeling of when you get swept into your reaction pattern is like, okay, you're paddling down a river and all of a sudden, pew, you just get taken off in another direction. And it's nearly impossible to exit it once you're in it.
Yeah, or you've capsized and you're in the water, you're in the current, you're just done.
Your best strategy is just an exit strategy. Find my out, and like figure out another way to navigate it after you've gotten out of this situation. So that's what I think. That's, I think, what your analogy was saying. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, you did, and you've used the term attachment style a couple of times. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll give the high level of it. I'm not. You can go way deep into this. People have spent their careers studying this their whole lives.
Yeah.
It's been a really big point of research in sociology since the 60s. And essentially the attachment styles is, how do we go about interacting with intimacy and connection with other people? There's 3 main types: secure, anxious, and avoidant. And then there's a little bit uncommon type but still present, which is a disorganized attachment style, which is someone that displays kind of in a random manner both anxious and avoidant tendencies. And so this theory proposes that, based on your life experience, starting with how you were raised and then further influenced by every intimate relationship you ever have, it shapes the way you seek out and respond to attachment to others and closeness and intimacy. So knowing whether or not you have avoidant tendencies, or your partner might have anxious tendencies, or maybe you both are fairly secure, or one of you is more secure than the other, it really helps you lean into what resources you have available, what kind of communication style is most helpful. It helps you take things less personally. If your partner has an anxious attachment style and they're kind of being a little needy during a period of time, you can have you can have that watercraft, like you can have that boat in the waves where, okay, this is not something I necessarily need to take so personally. This is something that I can understand about them as a person, and I can interact with that from that understanding rather than just reacting to like, hey, you're being too needy right now. Can you please stop?
Yeah. So what happens when, one person has, let's just say, anxious attachment style and the other has an avoidant attachment style, and there seems to be an impasse because they're just, the needs are such polar opposite. Are we back to the steel manning situation as part of expanding awareness?
Sure. Yeah. My best answer to that at this point in time is dedicated self-development.
What do you mean by that?
First, to recognize that they call it the anxious avoidant trap. It's like kind of a negative feedback loop, but one that's still in a uncomfortable way self-sustaining. And it takes dedicated effort to reestablish the foundation of how you communicate and interact with each other. Noticing when you're in those patterns and resourcing yourself to break them, which having the resource of a therapist or a coach, a skilled relationship coach, to help guide you through those moments can be incredibly, incredibly supportive, because it becomes really overwhelming at times.
Yeah, now I'm really picturing being in the surf zone with you. That just flat out sucks to get pummeled by waves.
Yeah. Yeah. So
okay,
those are the two parts. We'll start wrapping up here. The two parts of expand your awareness is part one, seek to understand. Have conversations with each other about, hey, what is it that you want me to see in you? And what is it that you'd like me to hear from you right now? I want you to feel seen. I want you to feel heard. So throw me a bone and help me know what to look for. And the practice of steel manning, which is notice you have a misunderstanding. Share or put the spotlight on one of you to come to the steel man version of what each of you is saying, and then go towards creating a shared perspective of what's happening and make your decisions from there. So that's the first part. The second part is studying yourself and each other. What are your attachment styles? What family history do you have? What are your triggers? What overall patterns do you have in your relationships that you want to continue, want to lean on, or what you want to adjust? We are going to put some resources for all of these things in our show notes. For example, we've got a really great book link, the book called Attached, and some podcast links on each of the different attachment style, and
an attachment survey. There's also a link for that.
Thank you. Yeah, an attachment survey that can help you figure out what your and your partner's style is. And really also just the encouragement to have support in this domain. Like having the support of a therapist or a coach is incredibly invaluable to help you see things in yourself that you wouldn't know to look for.
Mm-hmm.
So anything else, Christy, before we...
just be courageous and be curious when you're really seeking to understand and expand your awareness of yourself, first and foremost, as well as with, your partner or other loved ones. So, yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any stories, thoughts, or questions about relationships that you'd like to share with us, feel free to send us an email. Our email is info@journeyon-coaching.com. That's info, at journeyOn-coaching.com. Follow us on Instagram and send us a DM. Our Instagram handle is at journeyOn-coaching. To explore LifeProof coaching with us, head to our website and sign up for a complimentary coaching session. Our website is journeyOn-coaching.com. If you love the show and want to hear more, subscribe and download the show on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, blessings as you journey on.